She was just 14 years old, a book in her hands, her little brother's laughter echoing down the hallway. One second, the Reynolds house in Boise was filled with ordinary life. The next, flames tore through the walls, smoke stealing every breath. That night, Anna was dragged out into the cold October air. But Jacob never came. The world told her he had died in the fire. For 15 years she carried that grief like a scar. Until one evening, an envelope appeared on her kitchen table. No return address, no explanation. Just 5 words that would shatter everything she thought she knew. He didn't die in the fire. This is the story of a sister who refused to accept ashes as the end, of a family torn apart by secrets, and of the dangerous truth that resurfaced when a stranger finally reached out. But before we begin, tell me, where in the world are you watching from? I read every single comment, and I love seeing our community connect across the globe. The night Boise fell silent, the Reynolds house burned. On the outskirts of the Idaho capital, where pine trees pressed close to modest neighborhoods and the mountains framed the horizon, the autumn air smelled of damp earth and wood smoke. The 2-story Reynolds home stood at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, porch light glowing faintly, a scene so ordinary that no one could have predicted how quickly it would become tragedy. Inside, 14-year-old Anna Reynolds lay on her bed, a book balanced in her hands, its pages glowing under the yellow lamp on her nightstand. She could hear the faint bounce of a ball against her brother's wall. Jacob, only 10, rehearsing imaginary basketball games, as he always did before bed. His laugh carried down the narrow hallway, light and restless, a sound that usually calmed her. Then came the first snap, a sharp, brittle crack, like a twig snapping inside the walls. She frowned, lowering her book. The second sound was louder, followed by a strange, acrid odor. It wasn't the warm comfort of a fireplace. It was chemical, invasive, wrong. Anna stepped into the hall, bare feet cold against the wood floor. A haze clung to the ceiling, curling slowly, almost invisible at first. Then another snap, a low roar, and suddenly the far end of the corridor glowed orange. Flames licked up the wallpaper like claws tearing upward. Her breath caught. "Jacob?" she called, but her voice came out broken. From behind his door came a muffled cough. She lunged forward, arm outstretched, only to recoil instantly. The doorknob was red-hot, branding her palm. The house shuddered with groans and pops, as if it, too, was alive. Windows rattled in their frames, glass spiderwebbing with cracks from the heat. "Anna, get out!" Catherine Reynolds's voice screamed from downstairs, but the fire swallowed sound, every word distorted and frantic. Anna pressed her sleeve against her mouth, eyes stinging. She tried again for the knob, screamed Jacob's name, but the heat forced her back. Then arms grabbed her, her mother's, pulling her down the stairs. She fought to break free, shrieking, "He's still in there!" But the smoke was thick, suffocating, blinding. The front door burst open, and cold October air slammed against her lungs. Sirens wailed in the distance. Neighbors poured out of their houses, shadows under streetlights, their faces pale and horrified. Anna twisted, desperate to run back inside, but Catherine held her in an iron grip. A heartbeat later, the upstairs hallway collapsed with a thunderous roar, sparks exploding into the night sky. Anna's screams cut through the night, raw and desperate, but they were quickly drowned by the roar of fire and the shriek of approaching engines. Red and blue lights painted the houses on both sides of the cul-de-sac, flashing across windows and frightened faces. Firefighters leapt from the trucks, boots slamming against asphalt, hoses uncoiling with a heavy hiss as water surged through them. She stumbled across the lawn, coughing so violently she nearly collapsed. Her mother's hand shook as she held Anna upright, but her eyes were locked on the inferno consuming their home. Catherine's lips moved in silence, prayers or denials, Anna couldn't tell. "Jacob's still inside!" Anna screamed, her voice cracking. Neighbors turned, some gasped, but no one moved. The wall of heat radiating from the house was unbearable, flames clawing higher into the sky as the roof sagged and buckled. The firefighters fought desperately, water arcing in silver ribbons that hissed against the flames, but it wasn't enough. Within minutes, the second story folded inward, beams collapsing with a sound like thunder. Sparks rained down on the street, carried by the wind toward the dark silhouettes of pine trees at the edge of the neighborhood. Anna collapsed to her knees, her chest heaving as tears blurred her vision. She clutched at her necklace, a small silver locket Jacob had given her the Christmas before. It was still warm from the fire, pressing hard against her skin as if to brand the memory forever. By dawn, nothing remained but a skeleton of blackened wood. The air was thick with ash, the ground littered with shards of glass that glittered under the pale morning sun. The smell of smoke seeped into everything, clothes, hair, skin, like a curse that would never wash away. The fire chief approached Catherine quietly, helmet tucked under his arm. He spoke in a low, steady voice, but Anna caught fragments. Unstable structure. No survivors found upstairs? Her mother nodded once, rigid, her eyes distant. She didn't cry, not then. Anna did. She wept until her throat was raw, until exhaustion overtook her, and she sank against the damp grass, the locket clenched tight in her fist. To her, that night ended everything: childhood, innocence, the sense that home was safe. And though she couldn't have known it then, it was only the beginning. 15 years later, Boise looked different, but for Anna Reynolds, the city carried the same weight of memory. The trees along her street had grown taller, the storefronts downtown had modernized, but every gust of smoke from a neighbor's chimney in winter still made her chest tighten. At 29, Anna had built a life with careful, deliberate steps. She worked as a high school literature teacher, her classroom lined with worn paperbacks and handwritten quotes taped to the walls. Her students admired her patience, though they never knew how much of her energy was spent hiding the shadows she carried. Each morning she tied her hair back in a loose bun, slipped the silver locket, Jacob's locket, over her neck, and walked into school with a practiced smile. The locket had survived the fire. Firefighters had found it in the ash, scorched but intact. To Anna, it was more than jewelry. It was proof that Jacob had existed, that his memory was tethered to her no matter how much time passed. Outside of work, her world was quiet. She rented a modest apartment overlooking the Boise River, its waters restless and cold year-round. Books stacked high on her nightstand and a journal tucked beneath her bed were her closest companions. Though friends urged her to date, to build something new, Anna deflected with soft laughter. Trust had been harder to rebuild than the house her family once lost. Her mother, Catherine, lived across town in a smaller home. Age had softened her once sharp features, but grief had never left her. Conversations between mother and daughter were polite, even warm at times, but there was always a boundary neither dared to cross. They rarely spoke of Jacob. Silence had become their way of survival. Still, Anna's fragility wasn't weakness. Beneath her quiet demeanor was resilience forged in loss. She had learned to keep moving, to hold others' pain gently, even when her own threatened to surface. Her students noticed it most when she read aloud in class. Her voice would tremble on certain passages, as though she carried an understanding of sorrow that was deeper than the text itself. And yet, despite the years, Anna's nights were never entirely peaceful. Dreams carried her back to that October fire, Jacob's laughter echoing in the hall, the searing heat on her palm, her mother's grip pulling her away. She woke often with the taste of smoke still on her tongue. On weekends, Anna often walked the trails that wound through the Boise foothills. She carried a small sketchbook, not because she was an artist, but because writing in wide, empty spaces felt different from writing in her apartment. Sometimes she jotted fragments of poems, sometimes just Jacob's name, looping the letters as though practicing to keep him close. Her closest confidant was Olivia Perez, a journalist she had met at the university years earlier. Olivia was fiery, where Anna was reserved, always chasing leads, always asking questions. She had pushed Anna to confront her past more than once, suggesting therapy sessions, research into the fire, even looking at old police reports. But Anna resisted. "The past is ashes," she would say, half ironically. Olivia didn't agree, but she respected the boundary for now. Still, even Olivia could sense Anna's contradictions. She avoided crowds, yet her classroom was full. She resisted intimacy, yet her eyes softened whenever she saw children laughing together. She claimed to have moved on, yet she never took off the locket. There were things Anna had never told anyone. How she sometimes thought she still heard Jacob's voice in the sound of bouncing basketballs at the park. How, on anniversaries of the fire, she drove past the cul-de-sac where their house once stood. The lot was empty now, overgrown with weeds, a patch of earth the neighborhood treated like a scar best left untouched. She would park nearby, engine idling, staring at the space until tears blurred her vision. Then she'd drive away without ever stepping out of the car. Her students admired her, but they never knew that every lesson, every carefully chosen story she taught was her way of teaching herself. Themes of survival, of characters enduring impossible losses, weren't random. They were her map for living. Beneath her strength lived fragility, and beneath her fragility lived an ember of hope. Anna never admitted it aloud, not even to Olivia, but a part of her clung to the impossible thought that maybe, just maybe, Jacob hadn't been lost forever. It was a hope she buried deeply, but it would soon be unearthed in the most unexpected way. The first sign came on a Wednesday evening when Anna returned home after grading essays late at school. The sun had dipped behind the foothills, and the city was settling into its usual calm, streetlights humming to life, the river murmuring faintly in the distance. She unlocked her apartment door, stepped inside, and froze. On her small kitchen table lay an envelope. There was no sign of forced entry. The lock hadn't been tampered with, the windows were still latched. Yet there it was, a plain white envelope, her name written in blocky, unfamiliar handwriting. Her heartbeat quickened. She shut the door behind her, bolted it, and stared at the envelope as though it might move on its own. With shaking hands, she opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper. "He didn't die in the fire." That was all it said. No signature, no explanation. Anna's hands trembled so violently she nearly dropped the paper. Her throat tightened, breath catching, as though smoke once again filled her lungs. The words blurred before her eyes, but she read them over and over. He didn't die in the fire. Jacob. The rational part of her mind screamed that it was a cruel joke, some twisted prank. But another part, one she'd buried for years, ignited instantly, a spark of impossible hope. She searched the envelope for clues, turning it over, holding it against the light. Nothing, no return address, no postmark. It hadn't come through the mail at all. Someone had been inside her apartment. Anna sat at her table for nearly an hour, staring at the note, her fingers pressed against the locket around her neck. By the time she finally picked up her phone, her hands were steadier. There was only one person she could call. "Olivia," she whispered when her friend answered, her voice unsteady. "You need to come over. Now." Within 30 minutes, Olivia was at the door, coat half-buttoned, her hair still damp from a shower. She scanned the envelope, then the note, her expression shifting from disbelief to something sharper. "This isn't a prank," she said finally, setting the paper down. "Somebody wanted you to see this, somebody who knows something." Anna wrapped her arms around herself. "But how? They'd have to break in. And why now? It's been 15 years. Olivia leaned forward, her tone serious. "The better question is, do you believe it?" Anna hesitated. Tears welled in her eyes, but she forced herself to nod. "I don't know what to believe, but if there's even a chance—" Her words trailed off, unfinished. The possibility was terrifying. That night Anna barely slept. She left the envelope on her nightstand, staring at it in the dim light of her lamp, until exhaustion forced her eyes shut. When she finally dreamed, it was of Jacob, his laughter echoing through the hall, the smell of smoke, the unbearable moment of being pulled away. She woke before dawn with tears on her cheeks. The following days brought more signs. On Friday, she returned from school to find a second envelope taped to her apartment door. This one contained a photograph. It was blurry, taken from a distance but unmistakable. A man in his 20s walking down a street lined with pine trees. His posture, his dark hair, something about the way he carried himself sent a jolt through her. Scribbled on the back were 3 words, "It's Jacob, alive." Anna's legs gave out, and she sank against the wall. She studied the photo again and again, her mind spinning. The rational voice inside told her it was impossible, that she was being manipulated. But her heart whispered a different truth. The boy she had lost might not be gone. Olivia arrived within the hour. She examined the photo with a journalist's eye, noting the grain, the faint outline of a street sign, blurred in the background. "This could be anywhere," she murmured. "But whoever sent it, they're pushing you to look closer." That same weekend, Anna visited her mother. Catherine greeted her warmly, but the moment Anna mentioned the envelopes, her mother's face went pale. She didn't ask to see them, didn't demand details. She simply shook her head and whispered, "Anna, don't chase ghosts. Jacob is gone. You'll only hurt yourself." It was the first time in years her mother had spoken Jacob's name out loud. Anna pressed her. "How can you be so certain? You didn't see him. You don't know what happened that night." Catherine's hands trembled as she set down her teacup. "Some things are too painful to reopen." And then, more softly, "Leave it buried, Anna." But Anna couldn't. The final sign came a week later. She was walking back to her car after grocery shopping when she noticed something tucked beneath her windshield wiper. Another envelope. Inside was a note, handwritten this time. "If you want answers, come to Elm Street. Saturday, midnight." No name. No instructions beyond that. Anna gripped the wheel as she sat in her car, the note trembling in her hands. Elm Street was on the far side of Boise, near the lot where her childhood home had once stood. The message was clear. Someone wanted her to return to the place she feared most. She folded the paper carefully, tucked it into her jacket pocket, and drove home in silence. For the first time in 15 years, she felt it. Not just grief, not just longing, but the sharp pull of mystery, dragging her toward a truth she wasn't sure she was ready to face. And when Saturday night came, she would discover that the past had never really let her go. Saturday night arrived colder than expected. The Boise air carried a damp chill that clung to Anna's coat as she parked near the corner of Elm Street. Midnight was minutes away. The street was eerily quiet, lined with older houses whose porches sagged under the weight of years. A single street lamp flickered overhead, buzzing like an insect trapped in glass. Olivia insisted on coming along. She sat in the passenger seat, eyes sharp, a small recorder in her jacket pocket. "If this is real," she said, "we need evidence. If it's not, we need protection." Her tone was calm, but Anna could see the tension in her friend's clenched jaw. They waited. At exactly midnight, a figure emerged from the shadows. A man, tall and lean, wearing a dark hoodie pulled low over his head. He didn't come closer, just stopped beneath the flickering light and raised a hand as though signaling them to follow. Anna's pulse thundered. She glanced at Olivia, who gave a tight nod. Together they stepped out of the car, their breaths visible in the cold air. The man didn't speak. Instead, he dropped a folded piece of paper onto the ground, turned, and disappeared into the alley behind the houses. By the time they reached the spot, he was gone, vanished into the night as though swallowed by it. Anna knelt, picked up the paper. Written in the same blocky hand as before were the words, "He was taken." The fire was a cover. Look for Detective Mark Holloway. The name hit her like a stone. She remembered him vaguely, the officer who had come to their house after the fire, who had spoken to her mother in low, serious tones, while Anna sat numbly on the porch, wrapped in a blanket. He had retired years ago, or so she'd heard. Back in the car, Olivia's eyes gleamed. "This changes everything," she said. "If someone claims the fire was staged and a detective's name is attached, Anna, this isn't random. Somebody wants you to dig." Anna swallowed hard. But why now, after all this time? Neither of them had an answer. The next day, Anna tracked down an address for Holloway through public records. He lived on the outskirts of the city, in a weathered house that looked forgotten by time. Paint peeled from the siding, and an old Ford truck sat rusting in the driveway. When he opened the door, Anna almost didn't recognize him. His hair had gone white, his shoulders slumped with age. But his eyes, tired, restless, still carried a sharpness that unsettled her. "Holloway?" she asked cautiously. He studied her for a long moment before answering. "You're Catherine Reynolds's girl, Anna." His voice was rough, as though unused. She nodded. "I need to ask you about the fire, about my brother." For the first time his expression shifted. Not surprise, something closer to guilt. Detective Mark Holloway hesitated, his hand still resting on the edge of the door. Finally, with a weary sigh, he stepped aside. "Come in. But understand, if I open this door for you, there's no closing it again." The living room smelled faintly of old coffee and dust. Files and newspapers were stacked on every surface. Years of unfinished business gathered like ghosts. Anna perched on the edge of a worn sofa while Olivia scanned the clutter, recorder hidden in her pocket, but already switched on. "I've lived with this for 15 years, Holloway began, lowering himself into a chair opposite them. The official story was simple: faulty wiring, a tragic fire, one child gone, case closed. He paused, rubbing his temple. "But it never sat right with me." Anna leaned forward, her fingers tightening around her locket. "What do you mean?" "The fire's origin point was suspicious. Accelerants were found, though the lab dismissed it as contamination. And then there was your mother." His eyes flicked toward Anna, cautious. "She insisted you were both upstairs. Yet by the time firefighters arrived, only you had been pulled out," Olivia interjected. "Are you saying Catherine lied?" Holloway shook his head. "Not lied, but withheld. There were inconsistencies, and when I pressed, the department told me to drop it, said I was chasing shadows." He looked down at his hands. "I didn't. I kept digging, off the record." From beneath a stack of files, he produced a folder so worn its edges had curled. Inside were photographs, scorched timbers, fragments of toys, Jacob's room reduced to ash, and then, tucked at the back, a single report. "Witness statement," Holloway explained. "A neighbor swore she saw a man carry a child out the back of the house before the flames spread. The report was filed, then buried. It never made it into the case record." Anna's breath caught. "You're saying Jacob was taken?" "I can't prove it," Holloway admitted. "But the evidence was there. Someone wanted it erased, and someone wanted you to believe he died." The room fell silent. Outside, the wind rattled the loose siding, a lonely sound that filled the spaces between their words. Finally, Olivia broke the silence. "Who would do that? Who had the motive?" Holloway's eyes darkened. "That's what I never figured out, but I know this. The fire was no accident. And if Jacob survived, someone out there knows where he is." Anna felt her world tilt. For years she had carried the certainty of loss. Now that certainty cracked open into something far more dangerous: doubt, and with it, the unbearable possibility of hope. When she and Olivia left Holloway's house, the night felt colder than before. Anna pulled her coat tight, her mind spinning with questions. The envelopes, the photograph, Holloway's confession, it all pointed to one chilling truth. The story she had lived with for 15 years was a lie. And whoever had kept that lie alive was still watching her. Anna could barely feel her fingers on the steering wheel as she drove away from Holloway's house. The city lights blurred past the windshield. Boise's familiar streets transformed into something menacing, filled with shadows that seemed to follow her. Olivia sat beside her in silence, only breaking it once they pulled into Anna's apartment complex. "You realize," Olivia said quietly, "if Holloway's right, then someone staged your brother's death. That means whoever sent those letters isn't just giving you hope, they're pushing you toward something." Anna stared at the locket in her hand, the metal warm from her touch. But why now? Why 15 years later? That question echoed in her mind long after Olivia left. She sat awake at her kitchen table, the envelopes and photographs spread before her like pieces of a puzzle she wasn't sure she wanted to solve. But by morning, resolve settled in. She couldn't ignore it any longer. She started with Holloway's folder. The witness statement, half faded with age, described a man, broad-shouldered, wearing a baseball cap, carrying a boy out the back of the Reynolds home. The neighbor claimed she shouted, but the man vanished into the smoke. The name signed at the bottom of the statement was familiar: Evelyn Parker, their old neighbor 2 doors down. Anna remembered Evelyn vaguely, an older woman who used to bake cookies and hand them to Jacob when he played outside. If she was still alive, she might know more. Tracking her down wasn't difficult. Evelyn lived in a retirement home on the north side of the city. When Anna and Olivia visited, they found her in a sunny common room, knitting with shaky hands. At first she didn't recognize Anna. Time had blurred the faces of the children she once knew, but the moment Anna mentioned the fire, Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. "I told them," she whispered, voice trembling. "I told the police what I saw, a man carrying Jacob, but they said I was confused. They said grief plays tricks." She shook her head. "But I wasn't confused. He was alive when he left that house." Anna's pulse hammered. "Do you remember anything else? Anything about the man?" Evelyn hesitated, then nodded. "He had a scar. Here." She traced a line along her left cheek. "And I think your mother knew him. I saw them talking once, weeks before the fire." The word slammed into Anna like a blow. Her mother? She tried to process it, but Evelyn had already sunk back into silence, her hands trembling too hard to keep knitting. On the drive back, Olivia glanced at Anna. If Evelyn's right, Catherine knew the man who took Jacob, which means she's been hiding something from you for 15 years. Anna gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. Betrayal twisted in her chest, mixing with fear. She wanted to confront her mother immediately, but another thought stopped her cold. If Catherine had kept this secret all these years, maybe it was because the truth was even darker than Anna imagined. That evening, Anna drove to her mother's house. The air was heavy with the scent of pine, the streets eerily quiet, as if the city itself knew a confrontation was coming. She parked outside the small, neat home Catherine had chosen after the fire, a place without memories, without ghosts. Inside, the living room glowed softly with lamplight. Catherine sat in her armchair, a blanket over her knees, the television muted. She looked older than Anna remembered, lines carved deep around her mouth, hair streaked fully gray. "Anna," she said, smiling faintly, "you look pale. Is everything all right?" Anna stood rigid near the doorway, clutching the photograph Olivia had printed from the envelope. Her voice shook. "You told me Jacob died in that fire. You swore it to me. But you knew someone took him." Catherine's face drained of color. Her hands tightened on the blanket. For a long, unbearable moment she said nothing. Then, in a voice barely audible, "Who told you that?" "I spoke to Evelyn Parker," Anna snapped. "She saw him. She saw a man carry Jacob out of the house. And she said you knew him." Silence stretched, broken only by the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Catherine finally rose, moving slowly, as though the weight of years bore down on her. She walked to a cabinet, opened a drawer, and pulled out a box. Inside were letters, yellowed with age, tied with string. She set them on the table between them. "I wanted to protect you," Catherine whispered. "I thought it was safer if you believed Jacob was gone." Anna's breath caught. Safer from what? Her mother's eyes glistened with tears. "From your father's debts, from the people he owed. The fire wasn't an accident. It was a warning. They came for Jacob that night because your father couldn't pay what he owed. And when the flames started, I made a choice. I told the world my son was dead so they would stop searching for him." Anna staggered back, her world unraveling. "You chose to let me grieve him, to let me believe I lost him?" "I chose to keep you alive," Catherine said firmly, her tears spilling now. "If I had told you, if I had tried to fight them, they would have taken you too. I thought Jacob would be safer if he disappeared from both of us." The words hit harder than the fire ever had. The truth was more brutal than Anna could have imagined. Jacob hadn't died. He had been stolen, and her mother had allowed the lie to stand. Anna's chest ached, anger and sorrow colliding in waves. She wanted to scream, to collapse, to demand answers that Catherine might never give. But one thought rose above the storm. If Jacob was alive, he was out there somewhere. And Anna would not stop until she found him. The days after Catherine's confession blurred together. Anna drifted between rage and sorrow, her mind replaying her mother's words like a broken record. "I thought Jacob would be safer if he disappeared from both of us." At school, she moved through her classes mechanically, her voice steady, but her thoughts elsewhere. Her students noticed the shadows under her eyes, the way her gaze sometimes drifted to the window, as if she were waiting for someone to appear. At night, sleep refused her. She lay awake, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock, her heart pounding with questions. Olivia stayed close, becoming both anchor and investigator. She combed through the old letters Catherine had revealed, dozens of them, cryptic notes demanding money, threatening harm. They weren't signed, but some bore postmarks from small towns scattered across Idaho. One in particular caught Olivia's eye. A letter from 15 years ago, marked from a place near Coeur d'Alene, with a single line scrawled at the bottom, "The boy is safe. For now." When Anna read it, her knees buckled. Her mother had hidden that fragment of hope for 15 years, and the betrayal cut deeper than any flame ever could. Still, that single line became Anna's compass. She pressed her palm to her locket and whispered, "Jacob, if you're out there, I'm coming." Driven by that vow, she and Olivia began piecing together the fragments. Olivia tracked property records, combed archives, and leaned on contacts in journalism. Anna visited Holloway again, demanding everything he hadn't told her before. The retired detective, guilt-heavy in his eyes, finally gave her a lead. A warehouse fire report from years earlier in Spokane, eerily similar to her family's tragedy. Witnesses mentioned a scarred man seen nearby, the same description Evelyn Parker had given. For Anna, the pattern was undeniable. Whoever had taken Jacob had moved him, hidden him, maybe even raised him under a different name. And if there had been another fire, maybe others had been silenced too. But amid the hunt for truth, the emotional weight threatened to crush her. One evening she sat at her kitchen table, the letters spread before her like a map of grief. Tears fell freely as she whispered into the empty room, "Jacob, did you think I forgot you? Did you think I stopped looking? I never did." It was the first time in years she allowed herself to speak to him as if he were listening, and in that fragile moment, Hope didn't feel like cruelty. It felt like survival. The following weekend, Anna made the drive north with Olivia. The highway stretched endlessly, pine forests rising on either side, the sky a dull gray that pressed low on the horizon. Neither woman spoke much. The silence between them was weighted with both fear and anticipation. They stopped outside a weathered community hall near Coeur d'Alene, a place Olivia had tracked down through property ledgers connected to one of the threatening letters. The hall looked abandoned, its windows boarded, its paint peeling. Yet when Anna stepped inside, the air smelled faintly of smoke, as if the walls themselves still remembered fire. She froze when she saw it. On the floor near the back of the hall lay a basketball, faded, worn, but intact. She picked it up, hands trembling. A letter was taped to its surface. "He's closer than you think." Anna sank onto a bench, the ball pressed to her chest. It was more than an object, it was Jacob's world, his dream. She remembered him bouncing it against the bedroom wall, pretending to be a star on TV, laughing so hard the sound carried through the house. To hold it now felt like holding him. Tears blurred her vision, and for the first time in years she didn't fight them. She let them fall, let her body shake with sobs. Olivia sat beside her, silent, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "This isn't just a trail of clues," Anna whispered. "It's him. He wants me to find him." When they returned to Boise, Anna went straight to her mother's house. Catherine opened the door slowly, eyes red as if she had been crying for days. Without hesitation, Anna held out the basketball. "Why didn't you tell me?" Anna's voice cracked, raw with pain. "Why did you let me believe he was gone?" Catherine's lips trembled. "Because I was afraid. Afraid of what they'd do if I searched. Afraid of what you'd lose if you joined me." Anna's anger flared, but beneath it was something deeper. Grief for the years stolen, for the silence that had poisoned their family. She dropped the ball at her mother's feet and whispered, "I can't forgive you. Not yet. But I will find him. With or without you." For a long moment neither spoke. Then Catherine bent slowly, picked up the ball, and held it against her chest. Tears rolled freely down her face. "Bring him home," she whispered. Anna turned away, the silver locket cool against her skin. Her heart ached, but for the first time since the fire, her purpose was clear. The truth was no longer hidden in ashes, it was waiting to be uncovered. And no matter the cost, she would not stop until Jacob was in front of her again. Winter settled heavily over Boise. Snow lined the rooftops, the river slowed under sheets of ice, and evenings came early, drawing the city into silence. For Anna, the season mirrored her heart, cold, heavy, but not entirely lifeless. Beneath the frost lay something stubborn, something waiting for spring hope. She spent her evenings piecing together everything she had learned: Holloway's files, Evelyn's testimony, her mother's confession, the threatening letters, and the basketball found miles away. Each fragment formed a pattern, one that told her Jacob's story wasn't over. The truth was out there, and it was closer than she had dared to believe. Yet, in quieter moments, doubt crept in. At night she stood by her apartment window, the locket pressed to her palm, and asked herself the questions that haunted her. If I find him, will he even remember me? Will he hate me for not saving him, for letting 15 years pass in silence? Her students noticed her distraction, though they didn't understand its weight. One girl lingered after class one day, handing Anna a folded piece of paper. On it was a single line from a book they had read together. "Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul." Anna carried that scrap of paper in her pocket afterward, almost like a secret talisman. Meanwhile, Olivia prepared an article draft, never published, but written as both record and safeguard. "If anything happens," she told Anna, "the world will know your brother's story. They can't erase it again." Anna smiled faintly, gratitude heavy in her eyes. This time, no one's burying the truth. But the deepest reflection came one evening when she returned to the empty lot where her childhood home had once stood. Snow covered the ground, blanketing the scarred earth in white. She stood there for a long time, staring at the emptiness, listening to the silence where her brother's laughter had once filled the air. Slowly, she knelt and pressed the basketball onto the ground, letting it rest there, half buried in snow. Her breath came out in clouds as she whispered, "This isn't where your story ends, Jacob. It's where mine begins again." The wind moved softly through the trees as if answering her vow. Anna's journey no longer felt like an endless circle of grief. It had become a line pointing forward, however uncertain the path. She wasn't chasing shadows anymore. She was following breadcrumbs left behind by someone who wanted her to know Jacob was still out there. Her relationship with her mother shifted quietly after the confrontation. Catherine called more often, her voice softer, her silences less defensive. Sometimes they spoke about simple things, recipes, the weather, books Anna was teaching, and sometimes they let Jacob's name slip into conversation, no longer avoiding it like a wound too raw to touch. Healing didn't come overnight, but the truth had cracked the wall between them, and light was slowly bleeding through. One evening, Anna walked through the halls of her school long after the last bell rang. The classrooms were dark, the echo of her footsteps the only sound. She stopped outside her own room, looking at the quotes pinned along the walls. Her eyes landed on one in particular, one she had placed years ago without fully realizing how much it belonged to her story. "The truth will set you free, but first it will break your heart." She touched the words with her fingertips and felt tears prick her eyes. Yes, her heart had been broken by fire, by silence, by betrayal. But now, finally, the truth was setting her free. When she stepped outside, the night air was sharp and cold, but she inhaled deeply, filling her lungs with it. The stars above Boise glittered with indifferent brilliance, and for the first time in years, Anna didn't feel like she was standing still. She was moving forward, toward Jacob, toward answers, toward the kind of peace that only comes when you face the shadows instead of hiding from them. She didn't know how long it would take, or what she would find when the search finally ended. But she carried within her a certainty she hadn't known since childhood. She was no longer alone in her fight. Olivia was at her side. Holloway had given her the missing pieces. Her mother had surrendered the truth. And Jacob, wherever he was waiting. Anna pressed the silver locket against her heart and whispered into the night, "I'm coming." And in that moment, the silence of Boise no longer felt like grief. It felt like a promise,